2009. As you read those two scriptures, did you pick out the common themes? One person is in both scenes explicitly, that's Jesus. And one thing is in both scenes, I guess you could say two things, but one is mentioned and one is not. In both of those scenes, somebody washes, which means there must have been water and a basin. So our title of this morning's lesson is Basin Theology, and I think that if that doesn't make sense to you right now, I hope that by the end of this lesson, you're going to see that the term Basin Theology is something that we need to get used to. We need to start asking ourselves about what's our basin theology. And we're going to walk through both of these lessons, both of these texts, and we're going to see that they really do apply to us and to our lives. I want to acknowledge before we get started about our congregation and our strategy in 2009 and recognize first of all that God has really blessed our congregation. I get the privilege of standing up here and looking out over this audience on Sundays. I get the privilege of serving as an elder, and I know you and I know the people that are here, and on an individual basis, God has really blessed us. He has blessed us individually with things related to salvation. These are things like we see: Jesus, grace, the Holy Spirit, His Word, prayer. We ought to really be thankful for those things. We live in a wonderful time. We live in a wonderful place. We live in a place where religious freedom is ours, and it's ours to exercise, not ours to bypass or to skip over. But even more than the individual things, we're going to talk about in this week and next week the congregational blessings. And I could say to you as an elder, as one who serves as your preacher right now, that God has given our congregation great people. I look at the greatest thing that God has given this congregation, and it's you. It is you, the people. The elders believe that every single member of this congregation has been brought here by God and has a gift, a talent, a work to perform, something that this congregation needs. We want you to think that as well. We have all been given what we need to fulfill God's purpose for us. Let us hold that thought firmly in our minds that He has already given us everything we need to accomplish His purpose for us. But in spite of this, we have not really reached all of our potential. Our numeric growth as a congregation has been roughly static over the past 8 years, hovering around 150 or so. Oh, we bounce up and down, and our highs have been as much as over 200. But we've balanced out overall to, roughly speaking, 150 or so on a Sunday morning. When we consider our spiritual growth, we've had unevenness in our spiritual growth. We've seen wonderful growth in some people, and we have heard the voices of others who have wrestled with issues, wrestled with things that disturb them. And we have had open discussions about a sense of spiritual depression that some are experiencing. And the question for us every year, maybe more every day, is: have we grown in our spiritual life? Over the past year, as you look back over 2008, can you say, yes, I can see growth in my life. I can see growth in my spiritual walk. I walk a little closer to Jesus than I used to walk. So we see at one hand that God has given us everything that we need, and yet we still struggle because we have not accomplished the full potential that we see that we might have in the service of the Lord. And you have to ask yourself the question, and that is the question that we ask ourselves today: what needs to happen for us to break out, to break through, to exceed what we've been doing so far, to go beyond 150 in attendance, to go beyond sort of an uneven spiritual growth, to go beyond the services that we're already doing for those in the body and out of the body. We believe God has great plans for this congregation, and we believe that God is not limited in his ability to bless us. He has the plan, he has the grace, he has the blessings. So the question is, what is our role? What do we do as we serve an unlimited God with unlimited resources? But what we want to present to you over this Sunday and next Sunday, and admittedly this Sunday is a lot more of the theology side of things. Next Sunday will be more of the practical or tactical side of things. But we need to break through. We need to understand that the last 8 years are not good enough. That God has more for us. He expects more. He certainly has given us more than we've accomplished over the last 8 years. So I think we need to look at this and say that the breakthrough we need, and I'm going to make this more real. It's too long to really hold in your mind, but I think we need to address this. The breakthrough that we need is described here in Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, where Paul says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure." It's our responsibility to be the place where God exercises his will. It is our place to be his hands, his feet, his mouth in this society. In the places where you and I go on an everyday basis, we are to be the channel of God to the community for grace and for truth, for knowledge, for service, for love. Where people may not receive love from anyone else, they need to receive it from us. Where people may not have good deeds done for them, they need to have those things done by us. Where people might not receive truth from anyone else, they need to receive truth from us. So when we look at this, the title of the lesson and the thing that I want us to do is kind of take that term Basin Theology and adopt that. I know it sounds strange at first, but I was trying to take things that are actually sentences long, if not chapters long, if not the whole Bible long, and say, how can I bring this down into something that I can just have at the tip of my tongue, that I can bring out and say, hey, what's my thought on how God is going to work in me in this society? And I'm adopting the term Basin Theology, so you will hear this a lot, not only in this lesson, but as we move forward. Basin Theology is meant to be a summary of all ideas involved in the strategy we are embracing. So by itself, Basin Theology, I hope, will bring to your mind, as you think about that term, stories like the 2 stories that we're going to cover today, and also stories that you are going to see worked out in the lives of people at North Penn. So let's get into the text and let's look at Basin Theology. I want to look first at Pilate's Basin Theology. The events leading up to the passage that we have before us are that Jesus has been arrested, and he's been arrested by Jews who wish to put Jesus to death. He has been brought before the highest council in the Jewish religion, the Sanhedrin. It is early in the morning after the evening of the Last Supper. It is early in the morning and they bring Jesus to Pilate. They not only bring him one time, they actually bring him to Pilate. Pilate sends him to Herod, and Herod sends him back to Pilate. So he's ushered around, if you will, between not too far a distance within the city of Jerusalem, but you can picture in your mind a person who has been arrested, a group of people who serve the role as sort of armed forces, soldiers, if you will, and they drag him here before a Roman governor. They take him to Herod. They bring him back again. All the time, the Jewish leaders are trying to convince the Roman authorities that Jesus is such a bad person, that he has done things so wrong that they will agree that he should be put to death. And not put to death in the sense that the Jews were used to. A Jewish way to put people to death commonly was stoning. They want him to suffer. Stoning as a death was over in a matter of a few minutes. It was terrible, but it was over in a matter of minutes. With a crucifixion, you might hang there for quite a long time before you die. So they bring him to Pilate. Pilate has two responsibilities. He's got to decide if the accusations against Jesus are true and therefore worthy of the death penalty, the Roman death penalty of crucifixion. And he also has the job as a leader of a region. He is a governor. He has to keep peace with the Jewish people. In the years of his governing leading up to this, Pilate has not been a very good statesman. He has had several severe incidents where he has done something that so enraged and outraged the Jewish leaders that they have almost rebelled against him. And Rome, Pilate's bosses, they know that he's not doing a real good job in keeping the peace. So he's got to keep the peace, and he's got to decide if this man has done something that is worthy of death. So when you think about it, Pilate has a choice. He's got a choice of career or conscience. He's got a choice between what should he do that he knows is right, his conscience, and what should he do for the best part of his career. Luke tells us, Luke is a parallel passage. He says in Luke 23, beginning with verse 13, Pilate then called for the chief priests and the rulers of the people and said to them, "You brought me this man, the one who is misleading the people, and after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against you. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him." Now watch this. You see, he knows the truth. He knows that Jesus is innocent. He knows what the right thing to do is. But verse 16, he says, "I will therefore punish and release him." Pilate, in an effort to get out of this dilemma, this choice that is not very comforting either way that he goes, he's going to compromise. He's going to say, listen, I don't think he's guilty of death, so I don't want to kill him. What I'll do is I'll punish him. That would have been a scourging. That would have been a terrible thing. He does eventually scourge Jesus, but he actually offers this compromise to the Jewish leaders. The Jews don't go for it. So Pilate then takes tact two. Tact one, let's compromise. Let's punish him, but let's not kill him. So in his effort to get out of this problem of do I do what my conscience tells me to do or do I do what would be best for my career, Pilate tries to get Jesus released by presenting the Jews with a choice as to who they would like to have released. So you think about this, going back to Matthew 27, it says, "And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they gathered, Pilate said to them, 'Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ?'" Now, why is this a brilliant choice on the part of Pilate? Because if you think about it, he really wants Jesus not to die. He doesn't see anything worthy of death. And so he says, listen, Jews, this traditional thing that goes on at this Passover time, just to be nice to you, we present you with setting a prisoner free. Not all of the prisoners, just a prisoner would be set free. I'm going to give you the choice. I'm going to give you this choice, Barabbas, who is a notorious criminal, who has been found guilty of murder and rioting and all sorts of things that you would say, hey, I don't want that guy in my neighborhood. Or I'm going to give you a choice of releasing Jesus Christ. And wasn't it about a week ago that as Jesus came into the city of Jerusalem on a donkey, that you all took your clothes, your outer clothes off and laid down palm branches and let him walk in on this carpet of palm, and you shouted, "Hosanna, Hosanna." Pilate is betting that they're going to say, do I want to have a murderer released, or do I want to have somebody that just a week ago I ushered in as the king? Well, it doesn't work out the way Pilate plans. In fact, what happens is the Jewish leaders convince the crowd that they should ask for Barabbas. Going on in verse 20, it says, "Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus." Listen to the governor again. It says, "And then the governor again said to them, 'Which of the two do you want me to release to you?' And they said, 'Barabbas.' Pilate said to them, 'Then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ?' They all said, 'Let him be crucified.' And he said, 'Why? What evil has he done?' But they shouted all the more, 'Let him be crucified.'" Pilate has reached the end of his rope. He has no desire to participate in the conspiracy to murder Jesus, but the Jewish leaders have left him no choice, because when it comes down to it, his choice between career and conscience, he's going with his career. The crowd is now on the verge of a riot. The text goes on to say, verse 24, "So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing," notice that motive, he was gaining nothing but that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." All right, let's bring this home a little bit. We've told the story. What does this have to do with me? I'm not about to crucify Jesus. What you have here is a man who knows what's right. He sees a need, and he knows what to do. And not only does he know what to do, he knows that he has the resources to do what needs to be done. And yet what he does is the only resource he really puts into effect is the idea of, let me have some water. And they bring over some water, and it must have been in a basin or somehow, and you can just see him doing this ceremonial wash. This was not new. This goes back to the Old Testament, by the way. It was done in Greek culture outside of the Old Testament and all the way back in the Old Testament. There are examples, at least one, where people would wash their hands of their responsibility. So Pilate's basin theology was, I see a need, I have the resources to solve that need, I know what's right to do, but I'm going to get out of this responsibility, and I'm going to say, I am not responsible for the injustice that is about to take place. I wash my hands of any responsibility. So in spite of the fact of him knowing what's right to do, having the resources to do what's right, having, this idea that says, I'm not responsible for whatever happens, it's not me who's going to crucify him, but he lets them take Jesus away, and Jesus is crucified. It's a futile attempt to escape responsibility for doing what he knows to be right. He chose career over conscience. But Pilate was not the first, nor is he the last, that ever chose career over conscience. So Jesus' basin theology, turning now to John chapter 13, and looking at that story, during the last few hours before Jesus is arrested, he gathers his disciples with his disciples in that upper room to eat the Last Supper. Most people who are facing injustice, pain, suffering, and even death, they become very inward focused. They can think only about their own circumstances. They can only focus on their own needs, but not Jesus. Jesus is not self-absorbed at this moment. Sadly, in that upper room, his disciples have no idea what's about to take place. In fact, they're busy arguing with themselves. Luke again tells us, Luke 22:24, a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as the greatest. You can see this upper room setting. It's the Passover that they're taking. It's a special time in Jewish times. Jesus is about to institute the Lord's Supper, which is going to be the memorial feast that will go forward from the time of the church on. And the disciples have no idea about what Jesus is going to endure on the cross. And they're sitting there, you can almost see them elbowing each other as they kind of, they laid down around the table. It was not like our table and chairs. You kind of laid out and you were stretched out. Actually, the way they did it most commonly was they kind of rested on their left elbow and they ate with their right hand, and they would just be gathered around this. But while they're gathered around eating this Passover meal, they're not thinking about spiritual things. They're thinking about who's the greatest. And in that moment where Jesus knows what's about to happen to him, he sees in his disciples a need. He sees two needs, actually. He sees an inward need and he sees an outward need. Outwardly, when you look at it, the disciples had dirty feet. The dusty and dirty conditions of the region necessitated the need for foot washing. But foot washing was menial work. In Jewish eyes, it was not even something, Jews could enslave other Jews. It was an issue of debt. Foot washing was not to be imposed even on Jewish slaves. It was considered too menial for Jewish slaves. This comes from the Jewish rabbinic writings of the time. What you have here is that the Gentile slaves, if a Jew had a Jewish slave, the Jewish slave would never wash feet of the Jews. If a Jew had Gentile slaves, he could make the Gentile slave wash the feet of those who were there. It was reserved for Gentile slaves, and under certain circumstances, wives and children. Students who had rabbis, they did a lot of menial stuff, but there's no record at all that a student ever washed the feet of the rabbi that they served. So the argument that Jesus is hearing about who's the greatest points out the inward need. It was evidence that they had a heart that was filled with pride. They didn't really understand what was needed to live in the kingdom of God. This was not the first time they argued about greatness. You can read about that in Mark chapter 10. They argue there. In fact, one of the mothers of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, comes up and asks Jesus, hey, make my sons, one sit on your left hand, one sit on your right hand. So this idea of pride, who's the greatest, goes with the disciples over a long period of time. So now we get to the point. Jesus sees an outward need, dirty feet. He sees an inward need, prideful heart. And Jesus takes ownership of the problem. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garment and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then when he had poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Notice what Jesus did not do. Jesus saw the needs, but he didn't assign it to somebody else. He could have said, Peter, why don't you wash everybody else's feet? He didn't run outside and say, I got to find me a Gentile slave so I can have the Gentile slave wash the feet. Jesus saw the need, and on that moment, he took ownership. He took it over. He said, I'm going to see that this need is met. He not only is going to see to it that the physical outward need is met, he is also in that same action going to teach them what they need to do to remove that prideful heart. He's going to take care of the inward need as well. Jesus takes on the role of a slave here. The very fact that he takes out his outer garments and that he girds himself with a towel, and then he doesn't have another towel that he washes their feet with or dries off their feet after he washes them. He actually uses the towel that he's wearing to wipe off their dirty feet. There is no doubt Jesus purposefully took on the role of the most lowly slave in order to meet this need, and he did it on purpose. Confused, Peter objects. Peter says, hey, I don't wash me, I should wash you. And Jesus says, no, you need to let me wash you. Jesus then teaches this lesson to his disciples. He says, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should also do as I have done to you. All right, so what's the comparison between Pilate's Basin theology and Jesus' Basin theology? Both saw a need. Both had resources to do what was needed. Both used a basin and water. Pilate washed his hands of his own responsibility in a futile attempt to get out of owning that problem. Jesus, on the other hand, didn't wash his hands of anything. In fact, what he did was he washed his disciples' feet to meet both an outward need and an inward need. All right, two stories. What's our Basin theology? What is it that we need to do that says, hey, I have the Basin theology not of Jesus, not of Pilate, but of Jesus. I don't want to be the one who sees needs and then just washes my hands to say, I'm not responsible for what's going on. But rather to have the Basin theology of Jesus that says, here's a problem, I know what to do, I'm not assigning it to anyone else, I'm not delegating it to someone else, I'm going to do what needs to be done. What about us? What about us at North Penn? I'll let you ask yourselves questions like, which have I done more of? Have I washed my hands of responsibilities in an effort to say, I'm not responsible, something terrible may happen, but I'm not responsible, I've washed my hands? Versus how many times have you taken off your outer garment, put the towel of a slave around you, and done yourself what needed to be done? As a congregation, I think we've been pretty good, reasonably good at identifying needs. But what we have not been so good at is meeting the needs that we identify. We have not had, as a congregation, enough personal ownership in the meeting of needs. We have not always had enough volunteers to carry out the work that needs to be done in an equitable way. I look at it, and when I see the work that gets done here, I see a lot of work gets done, but I see a very small number of people, too small, that do a tremendous amount of work. Our budget in 2008, and you can read about this in the bulletin, it's published today, was short by nearly $35,000. We need more personal ownership of meeting needs. We are looking for everyone to own something in this church that's a need. These can be small, these can be large. And by owning a task, what I'm talking about is the model of Jesus' Basin theology, not something else. What we want to have in 2009 is a congregation of people who on a very individual basis say, I own this problem. I will make sure that it gets done. Now, I know that there are some problems that are beyond one person, and we will have groups of people owning problems too. But for the moment, I want you to think in terms of personal ownership of a responsibility. You're the one that needs to put on the towel. You're the one that says, I'll do the dirty work. I'll wash the dirty feet. We don't want to say, well, I know somebody will take care of that. We don't want to have the situation that we've had in the past. Well, isn't it in the budget? You know, we've got a problem in this congregation where I think we've disassociated ourselves from the work that gets done through this congregation and a lot of times our personal involvement in it. We can set up a budget. We don't follow it very well in 2008. But you can set up a budget and you give your money, and Jack Turner is extraordinarily efficient at sending out the checks for the things that are in the budget that we need to get done. He just does that like clockwork. He's so good at it, you don't have to think about it. And that's almost a problem. Don't stop, Jack. I want you to keep doing that. But that idea that I don't even have to think about what's going on, I know there's something in the budget, and I just give my money, and I just let it go. And then it happens. We're going to put a stop to that in 2009. I was raised in the church. I'm 50 years old. I guess you'd say I've been attending church for about 50 years. I started going to church business meetings when I was about 19 years old. So I've been doing that for a lot of years too, in a lot of different places. And I've never been in a congregation that is going to take the approach that we are going to take in 2009. I'll be standing in the back, shaking hands as I normally do after this lesson. And I want you to tell me if you know of another congregation that is going to take the approach we are going to take in 2009. So I want you to tell me, because in my 31 years of going to meetings, church business meetings, I've never known a congregation to take this approach. So what are we going to do? Well, our budget is going to change. And our budget is going to reflect the emphasis on task ownership. Normally, what a church does with its budget is you say, okay, what do we need? And then, we've purposed here, we've asked you how much you're willing to give, and then we do some extrapolation, we challenge you, and we come up with a budget. And if you just give the money to the budget, Jack will write the checks and work will get done, and you won't even know that that's going on. Well, what we're going to do in 2009 is change our budget. Our budget is not going up this year, 2009. Our budget for 2009 is going to be a keep the lights on budget, and it's going to more accurately reflect the actual giving. So you can look at what we gave on average, and our budget for 2009 is going to roughly parallel that. It's not like take 2008 budget and add 2% for inflation. It's actually going to be different. Our budget is going to be keep the lights on. Now somebody's saying, well, how is all the work going to get done? This is the way this is going to work, and we won't have time to finish this. This is what sort of gets taken care of next Sunday. That's why this is a 2-lesson point here. In the budget for 2009, we are going to have people take on works, and they are going to commit themselves either individually or as groups to the works that they want to be personally involved with. And if it's appropriate, it will go through and we'll adjust the budget, but we're going to have you commit to this. So for example, I'll just give one because we're running out of time. We'll finish up with this next week. If a group of you listens to Gary Cook in the next couple of weeks, 2 weeks from today, and you decide that you would like to help Gary Cook's mission, there is not going to be in the 2009 budget a place called Gary Cook Ministry. But if you know, that's a big work. You might want to say, I want to give $20 a month, I want to give $100 a month, I want to give $1,000 a month. We're not concerned. It might be a life group that wants to take this on. Maybe there's a group of people. And we're not going to limit things. You know, it's like if one group comes up with a good idea, we're going to open it up and allow other people to join in that work too. But if you come together, a group of you, let's just arbitrarily say it is a life group. A life group gets together and they say, we want to sponsor Gary Cook, and our life group members are pledging themselves to give an amount that equals $100 a month or $1,000 a month, whatever it is. You come to the elders and we'll encourage you to do that. Our elders are inclined to say yes to these things, by the way. And we will talk with Jack and say, Jack, we are expecting beyond the normal weekly budget, we're expecting this extra contribution, and that's going to be used to support Gary Cook's ministry. And it's going to come from these people. If this group, this life group, says we're going to do it for 3 months, we'll tell Jack it's a 3-month commitment. If they say it's a year commitment, we're going to say it's a year commitment. All right, I'm going to stop here. We're going to continue talking about this next week. Here's the bottom line of what I want us to do as we look forward. What do we hope to accomplish? We are trying to empower you to seize opportunities for service and pick up the towel and the basin and practice basin theology and become personally connected with your work. We want to see you have this direct connection. We want you to feel that this is work, that this is sacrifice on your part, helping someone do a good work. And we want you to be more involved than ever with the Lord's work. One more thought. By the way, it's not important for you to take whatever you're doing and run it through the church treasury. If there's an appropriate way for you to carry on the work and it never goes through the church treasury, that's fine. Just as long as the work is getting done. All right. Well, this is the end of part 1. I hope you'll come back next week for part 2, and we'll talk about this in more tactical terms. As you can see, we're taking an unusual approach to things, but it is our attempt to get our work done, to reach our potential more and better than we have so far. And we believe that when we are fully engaged with the work of the Lord, that evangelism will come and more people will want to be a part of this congregation. Today, if you have a need, if you need to have your sins washed away, you know what Jesus did in taking off his outer clothes, putting on the garb of a slave and doing the lowest labor of the lowest slave, that was really acting out what he did for us when he became a human. When he gave up the glory of heaven, became a man, lived as a man, and died on the cross for us. Jesus did that because you had a need to have your sins forgiven. If we can help you this morning, whether it be baptized in the watery grave of baptism or whether we help you in prayer, won't you come as we sing this song of encouragement?